What's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of Games Up podcast. My name is Cameron McCulloch-Keeble, and it's just me this week, as I stated last week, as it would be, because Lawrence is still busy acclimatizing to his new job, and Lewis is off working on his exams for his masters. So if you have Lewis on Facebook, or I think he has Twitter, or any kind of social media, drop him a message, wish him the best of luck, or of course you can drop him a message on the comments here, or on our Facebook page, if you feel so inclined to wish Lewis the best of luck with his masters. So until he gets back for the next few weeks, I'm afraid you're stuck in my company, but hopefully that's not a deterrent, and we'll get on with the show as usual. We start as ever with the news, and we start with a piece of surprise, Overwatch news. This is a pretty big piece of news for them though, as Overwatch this week has crossed a player count of 30 million players. That's pretty insane. To give that a bit of context, as of November last year, GTA 5, one of the biggest games of the last few generations, has sold 70 million copies, and at its last reported count-in, Minecraft was at 100 million players, which means Overwatch is about a third of Minecraft and half the way towards GTA 5, and the game's barely been out a year. Now, it must be said that these are player numbers, so these aren't copies sold. These could be people who are pirating the game, who have borrowed the game from their friend, or who've bought the game used. Don't do that. Buy the game, because it's really awesome and it deserves your support, but it doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon, so long may it continue. There you go, 30 million Overwatch players. The next piece of news this week is for those of you who are into games of a slightly different form, by which I mean alternate reality games. Now, if you don't know what those are, an ARG, as they can be shortened to, is something that's done usually to promote a product. It's mostly done for movies. Some of the big ones include Tron, The Dark Knight, and 10 Cloverfield Lane are very recent examples. But there may be one going on at the minute for Call of Duty's World War II Zombies mode. When the game was announced recently, there was a bit of a tease hidden on the website to the World War II Zombies mode, which started with some inscriptions which were etched into a helmet. So this was turned into a code which went into the website, which brought up a number of images. The most notable parts of these images are that they are in black folders, perhaps suggesting some kind of Black Ops link. That they feature portraits which are notable in World War II, specifically the portrait of a young boy, which is one of the most famous pieces of artwork to have gone missing during World War II, and it's lightly linked to Barbarossa, Frederick Barbarossa, who was a Holy Roman Emperor, but it was also the codename for Hitler's invasion of Russia. So this is kind of how an alternate reality game works. You tend to get something from the real world, which is then turned into a code or a puzzle, and deciphering that code or puzzle will sort of open up the next stage, and eventually something gets revealed. It's been done in games before. Sombra in Overwatch had an ARG, and now it seems to be happening for Call of Duty World War II, and it's Zombies mode. So if you want to be involved with unlocking whatever that means, or deciphering whatever that means, or generally getting to the next stage of this alternate reality game, check out the website, check out the Reddit to see where things are and what's been unlocked, and this is a really, really cool way to do this. I really like alternate reality games. I've taken part in a few. They're really good fun to play, and they're really good fun to sort of make the jump onto the next stage and have that feeling of having cracked a code as part of a big community. So they're a really cool thing to do, and we'll be following this one closely. So there you go, Call of Duty with an alternate reality game for its World War II Zombies mode. The next piece of news this week is that infamous 80s horror game Night Trap is getting a re-release. Now, this is kind of interesting. At the time of its release, Night Trap was quite scandalous. It was brought to the American court along with Mortal Kombat, the original Mortal Kombat, as part of a campaign that was kind of attacking games for their violence and their generally not being sort of safe for younger people and young children, and being darker than perhaps they should have been. Night Trap's a really interesting game to read about. It's a full motion video game, which basically means it's not animated. The actual content of the game is filmed, and you interact with it much like you would sort of choosing something on a DVD menu, and then the game plays out like that. It's an incredibly cheesy game about protecting basically some sorority girls in America from bad creatures. I think they're supposed to be vampires. But it's kind of interesting that the game, this known for being notorious at the time of its release, certainly is getting a re-release. Now, it must be said, games have made huge strides in graphics and in content since. Games have arguably jumped many, many levels of maturity, but as a result, the kind of notoriety that Night Trap gained at the time of its release, it probably wouldn't gain now. It actually seems incredibly tame compared to a lot of the things that comes out in games now. Specifically, you compare Mortal Kombat the original to the kind of absolutely grotesque shit that happens in Mortal Kombat now, and you'll see how far the gap is. It's going to be really, really fascinating to watch Night Trap be re-released, as it was at one point the figurehead for an anti-video games movement, and now it's pretty likely that it'll kind of release to a bit of an anticlimax. It almost certainly won't be considered in the same notoriety it once was, and we'll see whether any kind of game like that has the same resonance with the PlayStation 4 audience. But that it is, Night Trap is getting a re-release. The final piece of news this week is that reportedly Amazon's allocation of Red Dead Redemption 2 is already sold out for the PlayStation 4. The reason that this is so mental is because we don't know what Red Dead Redemption 2 is. We don't know when it's coming out. We know nothing about the game save for a trailer and a poster. This is really indicative of the power that Rockstar have as a developer. Rockstar are so able to build up a sense of hype and a sense of trust with their games because of the quality of what they put out. And it's really, really interesting to know that already people are buying into whatever Red Dead Redemption 2 turns out to be. Super, super excited for the game, of course. It looks just incredible. And it's building on one of the best franchises of the last generation, so there's got to be something there, but it's really, really impressive to see that they've sold out already. Also, we say this all the time, and we're really flogging a dead horse here, but don't pre-order games. You have no reason to pre-order games anymore. Yes, you might get some kind of pre-order bonus, but that stuff comes out anyway. Don't put your money down on a game that has not proven its quality yet, even with somebody like Rockstar, who generally tend to provide quality all the time. Don't do it. It's silly. You're wasting your money, and you're buying into a practice that is kind of unnecessary and a little bit exploitative. But I'm sure we'll get back to that in another week, as probably a topic of the week. And speaking of the topic of the week, this week, when the show releases, the UK will be being braced by an unusual phenomenon, a bank holiday. We don't get that many of them here. So if you're hearing this on the day it comes out or any time soon, we thought it might be a good idea to go over some of the games that you might want to spend your free time playing on a bank holiday. So there's a number of thoughts that we had about this. Maybe on a bank holiday, you want to stay inside, close the curtains, lock all the doors, and bunker down with a good horror game. So let's go over a couple of the most recently released horror games. You have Little Nightmares, which is a fascinating approach to a horror game. Rather than it being monster closets and dark hallways, this game instead takes place from the perspective of a young child. This young child can hide in darkened areas, under tables, behind things, for example. And the enemies that want to find this young child are all in plain sight. It's a really clever concept for a game that takes horror tropes and really turns them on their head. This time you're not looking to be in the light, you're looking to be out of it. You're not looking to find out where the enemy is, you're looking instead at how to avoid them. It's a very, very clever concept for a game, and it's a little different for a horror game. So if you're looking for something different, that might be it. But of course, if you're not looking for something different, then the go-to game for you this bank holiday may well be Outlast 2. Now, Outlast, when it came out a couple of years ago, was pretty popular, and it was pretty critically well received as well. It uses a main mechanic of having a camera, which allows you to see in the dark, but the camera has low battery, so you have to choose when you see in the dark and when you decide to walk into the dark without seeing what's in there. It's very claustrophobic, very somewhat reminiscent of kind of PT. It's lots of monster closets, lots of dark hallways, lots of grim, gory horror. And if that's the kind of thing that you're into, then Outlast 2 came out this week. I don't think it's done critically as well as the first Outlast, but it's certainly being fairly popular and fairly well received. So they may be your options if you want to choose to sort of huddle up with a good horror game this bank holiday. However, maybe you don't want the stress and anxiety and tension that comes with a horror game. Maybe instead you want to tap into some of the more childish fun of video games of the past, in which case it may be time to delve deep into the wealth of 3D platformers that have started coming out recently. Now, of course, at the end of June, we get Crash Bandicoot, the remastered trilogy of Crash Bandicoot. But until then, there's been a couple of exciting options. If you were a fan of Vudu Vince from the original Xbox, then Vudu Vince recently got a remaster. It's not been received amazingly well because it's a danger remastering any game from a couple of generations ago. You have to be careful about how they hold up. But it's very loyal to the original game, so if you were a fan of that, there's an option for you. But if you want something that's new, maybe you should look into Ukulele. Ukulele is made by Platonic Games, who are people who were previously of Rare. They were responsible for creating games like Banjo-Kazooie back in the day, and they've made a game that very much plays on the strengths of those 3D platformers, those classic 3D platformers that came out of Rare. Ukulele was released on basically everything. I think it's on the PS4, Xbox One, the Nintendo Switch, and the PC, and potentially some older platforms as well. So if rather than the stress and anxiety of a horror game, you'd like something a bit more simple and childishly fun, maybe you want to go for a 3D platformer. Something that's always fun to do on bank holidays, and something that I'll be doing this bank holiday, is sitting down to enjoy a good movie. So maybe you want something more cinematic out of your games, and you're in luck twice from the same company. In the past couple of weeks, we've seen 2 releases from Telltale, the first being the latest in their Walking Dead series. This is Telltale's The Walking Dead: A New Frontier, Episode 4, which came out on April 25th, so very recently. But maybe you want to tap into a bit of the Marvel hype that's going around right now and actually play Telltale's Guardians of the Galaxy series, which came out on April 18th, so about a week away from each other, and both created by Telltale. They're kind of like a modern version of point-and-click adventure games. They're very cinematic in the way that they're put together and the way that they're written. They're incredibly good fun to play, especially if you really care about the franchise that you're watching. And if those 2 franchises don't take your fancy, then we can recommend a few others as well. They have a Game of Thrones series, they have a Borderlands series, and they also have a Batman series as well. So if those 2 options don't take your fancy, then maybe you can get into the cinematic fun of Telltale in another franchise. But maybe this bank holiday you don't want any of that. Maybe what you want to do is not something single player. Instead, you want to get all your friends sat down around a sofa playing a game on the same screen, just like you used to when you were younger. And the best way to do that is unfortunately going out and buying a new console, but it'll be worth it because it's the Nintendo Switch, because Mario Kart 8 Deluxe released this week and the game is doing fantastically well. It's reviewing fantastically well. I've seen it played by a number of people in a number of places. It looks so much fun, and it's one of those things that's making me wish I had a Switch just a little bit more. So there, we think, are your options for this bank holiday if you're looking to spend the time doing a little gaming. Or maybe you don't want to do it on a bank holiday. Maybe you just want to do it on a Wednesday evening, because why wouldn't you? Wednesdays suck. So ladies and gentlemen, that is your bank holiday episode of Games Up podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, feel free to like the show so that we know that you enjoyed it, so that we know that people enjoy what we put out, and so that we know what kind of stuff to do in the future. And if you don't want to miss anything, because we put one of these out on Monday at 6:30 every week without fail, and we'd love for you to not miss one, so feel free to subscribe. Again, if you want to wish Lewis the best of luck in his master's exams while he's away from the show, the best place to do that would be on our Facebook, which you can find linked in the description, or our Twitter, which you can also find linked on the description and which you may have clicked on to get to this show in the first place. We hope you've had a good bank holiday. We certainly have, because we got to put this show out. So we will see you next week when we all have to be back at work. Boo. But until then, the game's up.